Hello Blender community, and thank you for watching this tutorial video. This is my first tutorial, so don't judge it too harshly. And if there's something I don't explain quite well enough or something you don't understand, please ask me in the comments. I'll try to answer all of them if I can. I should be able to, I'm not very popular. But anyway, let's jump right into it. This is a tutorial on how to make the rasengan effect that you can download from BlendSwap. I'll have a link in the description. And I'm doing this because it was requested by Mr. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Muhammad Adanish, who requested that I do a tutorial on how I made it. And so, here it is. Alright, start off, and turn on screencast key so that you guys know what buttons I'm pressing. And I am working in Blender 2.69 because I was having some stability issues with Blender 2.7. Speaking of stability issues, this is the third time I'm recording this because Blender crashed and once again reminded me the importance of saving frequently. But anyway, let's jump into the rasengan. First thing you're going to want to do is jump into the Blender render. That's what I made this in because at the time I had no idea how to use the cycles renderer. And this is the only way I know how to do the lens flare effect or twinkling effect that is in the test video. I have a link to that also in the description, or as an annotation if I can figure it out. I haven't made many YouTube videos, but I hope to start soon. Alright. So, Shift A, Mesh, Cube, hit Tab to go into edit mode, A to deselect all the vertices, B select all the visible vertices, make sure you don't select that back vertice there, X vertices, and you should be left with one singular vertex. And hit 5 to go into, I believe this perspective view, not very good at all the jargon, move that up and then out to Blender units, reminds me, metric, to meters, or Blender units. I like using metric because it has something that I can apply it to. And then move it over so that it is level on the y-axis with the origin. The reason you need to have it level on the y-axis and not the x-axis or the z-axis is because we're going to be rotating it around the x. We're going to be rotating around its local x. That's very important. Because if you rotate around the local x, you're not going to get a rasengan. You're going to get a bunch of particles rotating in a cylinder sort of pattern. That was an issue I had when I first made it. And just because it crashed earlier, I'm going to hit Control S, save it to the desktop as rasengan tutorial. Okay. And now that we have our vertex, we're going to give it a particle system. New particle system. Just call it rasengan. I'm going to change this down to 500. And lifetime to 50 is okay. Change the velocity to 0 on the emitter geometry. I believe that's what it says. Yes, on the emitter geometry. And now in physics, that's okay. And in render, we're going to come over here to group, or not group, object. And then we're going to create an object in a new layer. Click down here in the new layer button, Shift A, Mesh, Icosphere. And then come over here to your toolbar, and where it says subdivisions, bump that down to 1. This is a very low poly sphere, and the reason it has to be a sphere is to get the right shape of the trails that it leaves. And now we go back into our particle system and have it emit icospheres. Control A to make sure it's working. It's emitting from the origin. I know what I did. Emission verts. That's a very important button to hit. And also go to field weights and turn gravity to 0. So that you just have your icospheres emitting in that spot without any velocity or gravity acting on it, so they're not being thrown around in odd directions. Okay, now that we have that done, we're going to have to add a material to our icosphere so that it looks like the rasengan in the end. New material, call it blue. Diffuse slightly blue. And the specular, not quite as blue as the diffuse, but still blue. It's not really important since we're going to turn the emit up to, I think, oh come on, click it. 5 was the final value that I decided on. Actually, let's turn on shadeless. Nope. No, don't turn on shadeless. That's a bad idea. Alright, now you have your little particle right there. Actually, that's looking a little too big. And you can fix that by going into your particle system, going to render, and changing the size down to 0.015. A bit bigger than that. 0.25. That's looking pretty good. Control S, save right quick, so that if it crashes again, I can start back from here. And the lifetime is fine. It crashed last time when I messed with the lifetime, so I'm very wary about touching that button. I think the final emission render I had was about 10,000 particles, which is way too heavy for me to run while screen capturing, because I am running a very, very weak computer. But I think 500 will be okay for tutorial purposes for now. I can try it at 1,000, not 100, and see if it works out. You're going to want to split your window into a graph editor. Select your particle and open up this toolbar on the right. I'm not sure what this toolbar is called. You can go down to rotation, change this from global to local, and your rotation, hit I. And we only want it to rotate along the X, so we're going to delete the Y and the Z rotations here just by clicking on them and hitting X, so that we're left with just the X. And now that we have a keyframe, we're going to come over here to the right toolbar in the animation window, or the graph editor window, and hit add modifier, built-in function, I do that every time, generator, sorry. So now we have a constant line going straight up with a slight curve to the right, meaning this will constantly rotate and it will never stop. And now we can join these windows back, because I don't think we'll be going back in there unless something breaks. 0. Hit I. Oop. Okay, now that we have our particle, it's time to animate it. We're going to go over here to this right toolbar, go up to animation, making sure that we're in local rotation, and hit I. That has added a keyframe so that this particle starts here in the animation. We're going to want to right click, split area down here, and open up a graph editor. In the graph editor, we only want this to rotate on its X axis. So we're going to select the Z rotation, hit X to delete that, and the Y rotation, and hit X to delete that. So that it's only rotating on the X. And you may notice that it's cube action 013. It's because during filming there was an issue with Blender, and I had to come back and fix it and set up the particle system again. That's why some things may be weird. Anyway, after you delete those two, you want to open up this side panel in the graph editor and add a modifier, generator. so that it is rotating along the X indefinitely. You probably know where this is going. And then that cube, I'm going to give it a name so that I don't lose it. Rasengan. Emit. That's a good name. Alright. We have our rasengan emission particle. We're going to hit Shift D and R. And this new particle, you'll notice, retains all of the animation data from our original rasengan emission emission vertice. So that now all we have to do is hit A, Shift D, and the more of these you do, the better it's going to look, for the most part. There's a point which it's going to look terrible. If you do too many, it just looks like a blue sphere. But for this test, I'm only going to use a few particles so Blender doesn't crash on me. Speaking of which, I'm going to save again. Alright, that's looking good. Now we have our animation. If you notice there, the particles are emitting from the origin, sort of. That is a bug, and you can fix it if it starts happening in your animation by coming down here to the cache and just changing the step up and then back down, and then restarting your animation. That usually fixes it. Okay. Now we have our particles. And if you think they're going too fast, you can just open up the graph editor again. Open up the graph editor, and you can select a particle, open it up, come down here, and you can change this value, and it should move the, no, that's the wrong one. That's odd. Should be moving this slightly to the left or right to slow it down, but it isn't. I guess this is what you get. Alright. Anyway, now we have this. It's not looking particularly good. As you can notice, there are a lot of these little spaces in between all of our particles, which, if you have your particles set to a high enough number, you won't see as much, but they'll still be there. You can fix this by going to compositing and hitting use nodes. And that is the render output. Shift A, search, blur. Add in a blur node, and a value of about 2 works for the final render with enough particles. You may have to make this more or less depending, but that makes all the spaces in between the little particles pretty much invisible. Let's go back to default. Now what we're going to want to do is add another icosphere into the center and scale it down.